I still remember the way the courtroom went silent. Not tense. Not dramatic. Just stunned. A kind of stunned that thickens the air like humidity before a storm. The judge flipped through the final stack of documents, adjusted her glasses, and glanced at my ex-husband, Mark, whose smirk had been plastered across his face since the moment he walked in. He expected a victory. He always did. He thought he'd intimidate me with that tailored navy suit and smug posture, arms crossed like he was reviewing an underperforming employee. He thought I'd fold, the way I used to fold at home, letting him talk circles around me while dismissing anything I contributed, especially my little $60,000 job, as he called it, usually with exaggerated air quotes and a laugh. But this time, he wasn't the one in control. The judge set the last document down. Then she spoke the sentence that drained the color from his face. Given the evidence provided, including the financial discrepancies, undisclosed assets, and the demonstrated economic imbalance during the marriage, the court orders spousal support in the amount of $5,000 per month. His jaw twitched. His fingers curled. And that smirk, oh, that beautiful, awful smirk, crumbled. In addition, the judge continued, failure to comply with this payment schedule will result in wage garnishment and contempt of court proceedings. I didn't smile. I didn't gloat. I just breathed. Because that ruling wasn't revenge. It was justice, long overdue, thoroughly documented, and earned one patient, humiliating step at a time. The bailiff asked if I had any questions. I simply shook my head and gathered my folder, color-coded, tabbed, heavy with a year's worth of documented truths. As I walked past Mark, he whispered, "You'll regret this." But his voice was different now. No longer mocking. No longer certain. It sounded like a man watching the world he built on arrogance and lies beginning to collapse. And I didn't even need to reply. Silence was enough. Silence. And the knowledge that he was finally accountable. People sometimes ask me how I stayed so calm through it. How I prepared all of that evidence. How I didn't lash out or crumble or give up. The answer is simple, though the journey wasn't. I'm 62 years old. I've lived enough life to know that the truth walks slower than lies, but it arrives exactly when it's supposed to. But this moment, this courtroom victory, this shock, this is not where my story begins. To understand how I got here, you have to understand me. My life. My work. My marriage. My quiet resolve. The years of condescension and control. The subtle abuses that never leave bruises but leave marks just the same. And above all, the betrayal that tore everything open and forced me to choose between staying small or finally standing up. So let me start at the beginning. My name. My age. My life before the storm. Because this isn't a story about winning money. This is the story of how I reclaimed myself. And it all began long before I set foot in that courtroom. But before we go there, you should know one thing. Mark never believed I'd fight back. And that miscalculation is what ultimately destroyed him. Who am I, and how did I end up here? My name is Eleanor Hayes, and I am 62 years old. 62, and finally unafraid of my own voice. If you'd met me 10 years ago, you might not believe that. For most of my adult life, I worked as a senior administrative coordinator for a mid-sized architectural firm, a job I genuinely loved. I earned just over $60,000 a year. Not enormous money, but respectable. Stable. Honest. I was good at it too. The kind of good that doesn't make headlines but keeps entire systems running smoothly. I took pride in being reliable. Organized. Steady. The quiet backbone in a loud, unpredictable industry. And maybe that's partly why Mark underestimated me. To him, my work was invisible, background noise in the symphony of his ambitions. He worked in finance. Dry, numbers-heavy investment work that he somehow managed to make sound heroic. He often acted like he was the protagonist of our marriage, and I was a supporting character who existed for convenience. I wasn't raised to see myself that way. I come from a long line of stubborn, hard-working women. Teachers, nurses, small-town bookkeepers. Women who didn't complain. Women who just did what needed to be done. But somewhere along the way, life with Mark taught me to shrink, to keep the peace, to rationalize disrespect as stress or a temporary mood. I didn't marry young. I married at 46. I thought that meant I was wise. Think again. Mark swept me up with charm and confidence. He was 6 years younger, charismatic, and made me feel seen, at least in the beginning. He liked that I was stable, predictable. A grounding force, he called me. That sounded like love at the time. Later, I realized he meant I was easy. But at 62, looking back, I'm not ashamed of the woman I was. She was doing the best she could, with the tools she had, in a world that often rewards men for ambition and penalizes women for maturity. I lived a good life. A quiet life. I cooked simple meals, kept a tidy home, paid bills on time, and worked diligently at a job that mattered to me. I volunteered at the library on Sundays. I had 2 close friends, Marcia and Denise, with whom I shared coffee, gossip, and support. My life wasn't glamorous, but it was steady. Until it wasn't. The change didn't happen overnight. It rarely does. It began with little comments from Mark, about my salary, my clothing, my limited worldview. Then came the dismissiveness, the financial secrecy, the unexplained anger. And at the time, I didn't connect those red flags to anything bigger. But all storms begin as small shifts in the wind. And the storm in my life had been building for years before the day everything finally cracked open. What was our marriage really like, beneath the veneer? Families don't break in a single moment. They fracture slowly, hairline cracks forming under pressure until one day the structure simply fails. In my marriage with Mark, the cracks showed up early, though I ignored them because the surface still looked smooth. To outsiders, we seemed functional enough. We hosted holiday dinners, we took weekend trips, we exchanged polite affection in front of friends. But privately, there was an imbalance, subtle, persistent, corrosive. Mark came from a wealthier family than I did, and though he never said it outright, he carried an unspoken superiority. His mother, Diane, reinforced it. Every meal at her house felt like a performance review. She offered compliments like rationed breadcrumbs. "That's a lovely blouse, Eleanor. Very practical. I hear you work in administration? Must be nice not to take your work home." When I mentioned something from my job, scheduling logistics, budgets, project timelines, she would smile politely, then turn to Mark for real conversation. He basked in her approval. Then there was his younger sister, Tessa, always coasting on Diane's financial support. She'd start businesses that fizzled, date men who used her, and drift through life with champagne problems and beer bottle impulses. To her, I was boring. Too responsible. Not fun enough. In group settings, I often became invisible, present, but not acknowledged. And Mark rarely intervened. He found their dynamic normal. "It's just how they are," he'd say. "Don't be so sensitive." But sensitivity isn't weakness. It's awareness. And I was constantly aware of how they saw me. At home, things weren't much better. Mark valued status, appearances, financial dominance. He liked control, particularly control over money. He insisted on handling our finances, because it's his area of expertise. Little by little, my access diminished. Shared decisions became unilateral ones. Joint purchases became his purchases. Savings became something he managed. And whenever I questioned it, "Eleanor, you don't understand these things," that phrase became a weapon used to shrink me. Still, we had good moments. Shared meals, quiet evenings, laughter that felt real. Those pockets of peace were enough to keep me holding on longer than I should have. But the deeper truth is this. I was lonely. Lonely in a house where I cooked meals he didn't appreciate, worked hours he didn't value, and loved a man who saw himself as the star of a life we were supposed to share. I wasn't looking for revenge back then. I wasn't even looking for justice. I was just trying to survive. To keep the peace. To maintain the illusion of a functioning marriage. But illusions have an expiration date. And mine shattered the day I discovered what Mark had been hiding. What did he do? The discovery came in the most mundane way. A misplaced envelope. A return address I didn't recognize. A letter Mark apparently forgot to hide. I wasn't snooping. I was simply sorting the mail, the way I'd done for years. But when I saw the envelope, thick, official, addressed to him but referencing our shared address, I felt a tug in my chest. Curiosity isn't always a choice. Sometimes it's instinct. I opened it. Inside was a quarterly statement from an investment account I had never heard of, a brokerage fund under Mark's name only. A large one. Over $300,000 large. Funds acquired entirely during our marriage. Funds I knew nothing about. My throat tightened. My hands went cold. I read the document twice, 3 times, each time more slowly. It wasn't the money itself that hurt. It was the secrecy. The deception. The intentional hiding. I'd spent years listening to him belittle my salary, lecture me about budgeting, warn me about overspending on groceries. Meanwhile, he had been tucking away money like a squirrel hoarding nuts, except he never planned to share winter with me. I confronted him that evening, holding the statement with trembling fingers. What is this? He barely glanced at it. Oh, that. It's nothing. $300,000 isn't nothing. He shrugged. It's an account for long-term assets. You don't need to worry about it. But it's marital income. Why didn't you tell me? Because you'd make a big deal out of it. Honestly, Eleanor, this is why I keep things separate. You don't understand how investments work. There it was again. The dismissal. The condescension. The twisting of blame. But something inside me shifted. This is illegal, Mark, I said quietly. You're hiding marital assets. He laughed. Actually laughed. Please. You think you're going to take me to court? With your little $60,000 job. That sentence. Those words. They lit a fuse inside me. Not anger. Not rage. Clarity. For years, he had underestimated me. Treated me like background noise. But in that moment, I realized something important. A person who underestimates you will never see you coming. He walked away from the argument, annoyed, confident he had won. But this time, I didn't shrink. I didn't apologize. I didn't smooth things over. I sat down at the kitchen table, opened my laptop, and began a folder titled Documentation. I didn't know exactly what I would do yet. But I knew one thing with absolute certainty. I wasn't going to let this go. How do I gather evidence against him quietly and effectively? Once I made the decision to act, a calmness settled over me, a clarity sharper than fear. I became observant, methodical, deliberate. Years of administrative work had trained me well. Track everything, date everything, verify everything. My folder grew quickly. I began with the brokerage account statement, scanning it into a secure drive he didn't know existed. Then I pulled our tax returns, old, new, joint, and separate filings he insisted on completing for efficiency. For the first time, I examined them line by line. And suddenly, patterns emerged. Income discrepancies. Unreported dividends. Mysterious deductions. Hidden transfers. The deeper I looked, the more obvious it became. He had been hiding money for years. Then came the digital trail. Passwords, receipts, emails, breadcrumbs left by a man who thought secrecy made him clever. But secrecy makes people careless. They hide things poorly when they think no one is watching. I watched. Quietly. Carefully. I didn't confront him again. I stayed polite. Predictable. Calm. He didn't suspect a thing. Within a month, I had enough evidence to fill a binder. That's when I contacted a lawyer. Her name was Carla Merriman, a sharp, seasoned family attorney recommended by my friend Denise. Carla was in her late 50s, polished but warm, with the kind of presence that filled a room without raising her voice. When I placed the binder on her desk, she raised an eyebrow. "You've done half my work for me already." "I just want the truth to come out," I said. She smiled. "It will." Working with Carla was empowering. She validated every instinct I'd suppressed for years. She explained my rights. She showed me how deeply Mark had violated financial transparency laws. She mapped out a strategy. And then she gave me the most important piece of advice. Stay quiet. While we build the case, act completely normal. So I did. At home, I played the role Mark expected. Mild, compliant, easy to ignore. I still cooked dinner. Still asked about his day. Still listened to his rants about co-workers and market volatility. Meanwhile, Carla and her team were subpoenaing records, analyzing transactions, and tracing assets. What we found astonished even her. He wasn't hiding a little money. He was hiding nearly $500,000, spread across multiple accounts. More importantly, he had done so while using my income to pay most household expenses, freeing up his money for personal investments. Carla looked at me one afternoon and said, "Eleanor, you have a very strong case. He can't talk his way out of this." For the first time in years, I felt powerful. I wasn't seeking revenge. I was seeking justice. And justice was unfolding one document at a time. When do I finally confront him, or let the confrontation happen for me? The turning point came the night Mark slammed the front door so hard a picture frame rattled off the wall. He'd had a bad day at work, and bad days always gave him permission to be cruel. He stormed into the kitchen, tossed his jacket over a chair, and snapped, "Why is the house so cold? And why isn't dinner ready?" Dinner was ready. It had been for 15 minutes. "I warmed it twice," I said. "I didn't know when you'd be home." He scoffed. "Maybe if you had a real job, you'd understand stress." There it was again. That habitual insult. My salary as a punchline. My career as a target. My stability as something beneath him. Only this time, I wasn't hurt. I was done. Before he went to bed, he launched into one of his monologues about financial responsibility, lecturing me as if I were a student who'd failed an exam. I listened quietly, not reacting, just observing the man who had built his ego on belittling me. When he finally went upstairs, I stayed at the table with a cup of tea, letting the quiet wrap around me. And in that quiet, the decision crystallized. I wasn't going to protect him anymore. I wasn't going to soften the blow he had earned. I wasn't going to shrink myself to make him comfortable. The next morning, I called Carla. "I'm ready," I said. "Ready for what?" "To file." There was a pause, then a satisfied exhale. "I'll prepare everything." The process moved quickly after that. Divorce papers were served. Mark's confusion turned to indignation. Indignation turned to outrage. Outrage turned to threats. "You're overreacting. You'll get nothing from me. You can't survive without me. You'll regret this." But I didn't regret it. Not even once. For the first time in years, I felt steady, clear, whole. Like I'd stepped out of a dim room into sunlight that was warm without apology. Carla guided me through every step: financial disclosures, asset tracing, deposition preparation. Mark tried to stall, manipulate, intimidate. None of it worked. The paper trail was too strong. And then came the day he realized I wasn't bluffing. He showed up at the mediator's office expecting me to fold. When he saw the evidence binder, 3 inches thick, color-coded, with his name stamped on every hidden asset, his face drained of confidence. "This is a witch hunt," he sputtered. "This is documentation," Carla replied. That was the moment the balance of power shifted. He couldn't charm his way out. He couldn't bully his way out. He couldn't lie his way out. Truth had caught up to him. And all I had to do was stand my ground. What happens when the evidence finally reaches the courtroom? Courtrooms have a particular kind of silence, the kind that hums beneath fluorescent lights and polished wood. A silence that knows secrets are about to become public. Mark walked in with false confidence, shoulders squared, jaw set, wearing that same navy suit he always wore to intimidate people. But intimidation doesn't work when you're outnumbered by the truth. The judge, a sharp woman in her early 70s, didn't waste time. She reviewed each document, each bank statement, each asset transfer, every hidden account, every unexplained withdrawal, every tax discrepancy. Mark's attorney kept shifting in his seat, flipping through the binder as if hoping a magic escape hatch would appear. It didn't. When the judge questioned Mark, he tried charm first. "I believe my wife has misunderstood." Then he tried confusion. "These accounts. I don't recall. Perhaps there's been an error." Then he tried anger. "She's making a mountain out of nothing." But the judge was unmoved. "Mr. Hayes," she said, "your wife has provided clear, detailed, and legally verifiable evidence of financial misconduct. The burden is on you to prove otherwise." He couldn't. Because the truth was airtight. Carla presented everything calmly, systematically, like a surgeon removing a tumor layer by layer. By the end of the hearing, Mark wasn't speaking at all. His arrogance had drained away, replaced by the realization that he was cornered, not by me, but by his own choices. When the judge issued her ruling, spousal support of $5,000 per month, division of assets in my favor, and financial penalties for non-disclosure, Mark sat motionless. The man who once mocked my little $60,000 job now had to pay nearly the same amount each month just to meet court-mandated obligations. It wasn't revenge. It was arithmetic. A quiet, poetic consequence of his own greed. And the best part. I didn't need to raise my voice. I didn't need to demean him. I didn't need to mirror his cruelty. His downfall came from the truth, delivered through patient documentation and legal process. Walking out of the courtroom, I felt weightless. 16 years of disrespect, manipulation, and isolation lifted from my shoulders as if someone had finally unlocked invisible chains. Mark didn't approach me. He didn't shout. He didn't beg. He simply sat there, stunned, holding a life he could no longer manipulate. Power shifts quietly. Justice unfolds slowly. But when it arrives, it is unmistakable. What happens to me after winning? How do I heal? The first morning after the ruling, I woke up to a stillness I hadn't felt in years. The house, my house now, felt different, lighter, as if it could breathe again. For a while, I just sat at the kitchen table with my coffee and listened to the refrigerator hum. There was peace in that sound. A small, ordinary peace I'd been starved of. Then came the emotions I had suppressed for too long: relief, grief, anger, pride, exhaustion. They arrived in waves, not violent but full, like tides finally reaching shore. I didn't jump into a new life overnight. Healing isn't a sprint. It's a slow, deliberate unpacking of everything you carried too long. I reconnected with myself in small ways. I returned to reading mystery novels. I replanted the herbs in the window box. I invited Marcia and Denise for coffee without worrying about Mark's disapproval. I took long walks after work, letting the late afternoon light warm my face. And for the first time in decades, I didn't apologize for existing. My job, once mocked, became a place of renewed purpose. My co-workers, most of whom never knew what I was enduring, embraced me with support and genuine pride. "You seem lighter," one said. "I am," I replied. The alimony wasn't about money. I would have survived without it. It was about recognition, legal acknowledgement of the years I carried a household while Mark hid assets and belittled my efforts. As weeks turned into months, I noticed something surprising. I wasn't bitter. I didn't want revenge. I didn't want him to suffer. I wanted him to face himself. And from what I heard through the grapevine, he did. Job stress. Financial strain. reputation damage. All consequences of choices he made long before I ever picked up a pen to document anything. But his life was no longer my concern. My concern was rebuilding mine. And slowly I did. One quiet step at a time. What wisdom did I gain from all this? Looking back now, with the perspective of a woman who survived emotional erosion and rebuilt herself piece by piece, I've learned something clear and simple. Strength isn't always loud. Power isn't always visible. And justice doesn't always look like revenge. Sometimes, justice is a folder of documents. A firm lawyer. A calm voice in a courtroom. A woman who finally decides enough is enough. For years, I believed keeping the peace was noble. That sacrificing my needs was mature. That staying quiet was the same as staying strong. But silence, I've learned, can be a cage when it protects the wrong person. If you take nothing else from my story, take this. Never let someone convince you that your work, your worth, or your voice is small. People who belittle you reveal only their own insecurity. My little $60,000 job built my stability. It funded our home. It kept us afloat. It was honest work, something Mark's secret accounts could never claim. Life is quieter now. Cleaner. And in that quiet, I've found myself again. I'm not angry. I'm not vengeful. I'm not triumphant. I'm simply free. And if freedom comes wrapped in a court order that humbles a man who once mocked me, well, that's just poetic symmetry. Thank you for listening. Thank you for walking through this story with me. And thank you for letting me reclaim my voice.